guys. Welcome to another SIGcast, this one on transnationalism and the development of the European Union. The music you just heard there was the European Union National Anthem, or I guess I should say the European Anthem. The melody used to symbolize the EU comes from the Ninth Symphony, composed in 1823 by Ludwig van Beethoven. When he set music to Ode to Joy, Friedrich von Schiller's lyrical verse from 1785 was combined with it. The anthem symbolizes not only the European Union, but also Europe in a wider sense. So let's talk about the development of the European Union. And first, we kind of revisit some things that we've already covered with post-World War II economic unity. Post-war economic solutions to prevent another world war began to become discussed at a place called Bretton Woods in New Hampshire. Here, the foundation for the modern international monetary system was laid out. All 44 members of the Allies during World War II came together in this New Hampshire resort town to discuss what the plans were after victory against the Axis powers. And if you remember, they established GATT, G-A-T-T, the General Agreements of Tariff and Trade, or General Agreements of Trade and Tariffs, which sought to stimulate international trade after the war by lowering and reducing tariffs and trade restrictions. They agreed that all national currencies would be based off of the gold standard and the U.S. dollar. This policy would actually last until 1971, when the United States no longer based its currency on gold and just went to a fiat rate, which only has value, established value, because the government says so. They also implemented the IMF, or the International Monetary Fund, which was designed to give short-term loans to struggling countries to prevent deep economic crises, radicalism, and anarchy. This fund became the instrumental part of the post-war economic boom of the West. If you look here, this is a graph from Wikipedia, believe it or not, of countries having a banking crisis in each year since 1800. And the dramatic feature of this graph is the virtual absence of a banking crisis during the period of Bretton Woods Agreement, which lasted from 45 to 71. Now, aside from economic unity and stability, one of the themes of Europe and the world following World War II was transnationalism, the greater cooperation of nations and organizations. Examples of transnationalism are entities such as the United Nations, which works together with hundreds of countries for peacekeeping and aid. We've already discussed the General Assembly, the Security Council, and how that works. However, following the extreme nationalism and devastation of Europe before and during World War II, a new attitude had begun to develop in Western Europe. While Eastern Europe was forced to cooperate with the Soviet Union and the Soviet sphere, Western states began economically cooperating together on a volunteer basis. One example of this was the Council of Europe, which was founded in 1948. European Federalists hoped that this council would quickly evolve into a true European Parliament with actual sovereign or ruling rights over all European nations. It didn't really happen or transpire because Britain's obligations to its empire and its special relationship with the United States. They didn't want to give power up, or the special privilege or the special relationship with the United States, to a special council that might prevent or hinder this relationship. But the discussion began or continued with economic solutions. They started with free trade zones. Europe between the 1950s and the 1990s would move from a purely economic union to a political union as well. And that's what we're going to talk about here with transnationalism. So, again, following World War II, the French would incept an idea to help promote their national industry by cooperating with other more productive nations for their own benefit. The French was under leadership of the French resistance leader during World War II, who'd become president post-World War II France, named Charles de Gaulle. He resented being considered a second-rate nation after World War II behind the U.S. and the USSR. While this started as a selfish plan, it soon became apparent that there were benefits of this economic cooperation that would be extremely beneficial to not just France, but all participants. And by 1950, it became clear that France could not keep up industrially with its neighbors, particularly because of its poor iron and coal reserves. While initially wanting to control coal and iron-rich portions of Germany after World War II, the French, the U.S., and Britain quickly realized that this would only lead to more problems if they tried to basically take over parts of Germany. And again, if you think about it, they learned from their history, much like the occupation of the Rhineland by the French, or the fighting over the invasion of the Ruhr Valley, where we talked about passive resistance to the reparations following World War I. So they wanted to avoid the tensions with Germany that had existed before World War II, and hopefully avoid the same thing happening in possible eruption of World War III. So the French solution was to form an economic union with Germany, Italy, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, allowing for free trade and job movement within the coal and iron industry. This was known as the Schuman Plan, as it was largely organized by a French economist and statesman named Jean Monnet Schuman. It was a proposal for an international organization to control and integrate European steel and coal production. It included France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, Luxembourg, Netherlands, and they all accepted it by 1952. The flag here on this map is known as the Six. Now, Britain refused to join because of its significant own interest in its own steel and coal production in its empire, but also because of its close trade relationship with the United States. And at this point, the United States is still a producer, one of the largest, if not the largest producer of steel and coal in the world. But the immediate economic goal for the European coal and steel community, also known as the ECSC, was a single competitive market without national tariffs and quotas. Synthesis moment here, ding ding. The Zollverein, if you remember, the Zollverein was proposed in the German states, a free trade zone, which saw Austria not participate, but kind of led to the development of Prussia leading the way for a unified Germany. If you don't know the Zollverein, look that up definitely between or before the AP exam. By 1958, the coal and steel moved freely among the Six Nations, and the far-reaching goal went beyond economic unity. There were some people that hoped that economic cooperation and reliability on one another would create such a tight bond that war would be unthinkable and virtually impossible. Advanced cooperation. By 1957, the success of the ECSC was widely known, as the industrial sectors of all Six Nations grew substantially in the first 2 decades. The plan had worked so well that the ECSC expanded beyond just coal and steel and included more industries for free trade and job movement among the Six Nations. Witnessing the success of the ECSC, Germany, France, and Italy, and Benelux, which is Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, other nations, including the UK, joined the newly named European Economic Community. So the ECSC started to call themselves the EEC, or the European Economic Community. This was established with the Treaty of Rome in 1957. It was also known as the Common Market. So please note the EEC, also known as the Common Market. These countries would now engage in free trade and job movement within the EEC across the borders. They also held common tariffs with countries outside the group and low or no tariffs with countries participating internally. They had common economic policies, allowed for regional specialization where countries could focus on producing goods where they had the competitive advantage. This was at the time also that plans began for a common currency to replace individual currencies of each nation to try to make financial transactions smoother and easier. Initially, this was working very, very well. However, in the 1960s, as we note, with migrant workers or what we call guest workers and immigrants coming in from the areas decolonized, a resurgence of traditional nationalism occurred. Again, we know that this is very cyclical. France established the Fifth Republic, which gave stronger powers to their president as Charles de Gaulle came back, and he lasted in office until 1969. This is a picture of Charles de Gaulle at the end of World War II. He withdrew France from NATO, as he said it was controlled too much by the United States, and he began developing France's own nuclear weapon arsenal. De Gaulle also vetoed twice admittance of pro-Britain into the EU. So again, he would veto the admittance of pro-United States Britain into the EU. He was kind of standing up to what he believed that the balance of power had shifted too heavily in favor of the United States. So Britain wasn't allowed to enter the EU until 1973. And again, this new economic union proved to be highly beneficial, making the EEC the largest economy in the world, and they actually even passed the United States. But by the 1990s, more countries wanted to become members. There was a greater desire for unification, and plans for the new European Union were made. Rather than just be an economic group, this was a supranational organization that's membership was voluntary but had coercive powers, not just voluntary. German Chancellor Helmut Kohl and French President Mitterrand proposed an EU with a single currency and a common defense foreign policy. Many European nations, particularly the UK, were concerned with sovereignty and groups of governments that would be making rules and laws for other nations to adhere to. Many Brits worried about being pulled into another conflict that really didn't involve their own national interests, much like when the United States opposed entrance to the League of Nations following World War I, despite the League of Nations being Woodrow Wilson's brainchild. Margaret Thatcher, England's Prime Minister, opposed UK's entrance into the EU until 1990, when she resigned and her successor, John Major, urged entrance. Nonetheless, the plans for the EU, or the structure, were made. A common currency was developed known as the euro, and the EU was formed in 1991. This was known as the Maastricht Treaty, probably botching that pronunciation, but I apologize. It was the most radical revision of the EC, or Common Market, since its inception. So if you look on this map, by 1995, the EC had 15 members: Germany, France, Italy, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, UK, Ireland, Spain, Greece, Portugal, Austria, and Finland. In 1996, the EC was officially renamed the EU, or the European Union. The euro dollar, or the euro, went into effect in 2002 and became the single currency of the EU. It integrated the currency of the 12 Western and European nations. Britain resisted this economic integration and chose to remain loyal, or the sovereignty of the British pound. By 2005, the EU added 10 new nations: Cyprus, Czech Republic, Estonia, Latvia, Hungary, Lithuania, Malta, Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia, Romania, and Bulgaria were added by 2007. So, within the European Union, there are no political boundaries, and citizens of the EU can live and work freely in any EU country. Besides free trade and common tariffs to outside groups, the EU also has a functioning representative assembly known as the European Parliament, elected EU body that consists or consults on issues proposed by the European Commission. It passes the majority of EU's laws, and it's the only EU institution that meets and debates in public. It is elected. People being elected are capable of being any citizens of the EU, and it represents all the people's interests. All are eligible for running for the European Parliament, as I just said, which can make laws and policies that all members of the EU must abide by, or are sanctioned, or are removed if they don't abide by. There's also a European Court of Justice that interprets and administers these laws. There's actually a Supreme Court of Europe with active jurisdiction over all EU members and the power to strike down EU states' domestic laws if they feel them to be unjust, kind of a form of judicial review. The euro is, however, not mandatory, although nearly all EU members have converted their currencies over to the euro. While countries such as Britain did not accept the euro, most did, and the value is controlled by a European Central Bank to maintain stability. Tomorrow in class, we will discuss some of the problems that exist with the EU recently, as early as 2016, including the issue of Brexit. Thanks for tuning in, and onward we go.